Okay, I could start. Um, First off, let me say welcome to all of our listeners and our viewers. We appreciate you joining us. I'm State Senator Barbara Favola, and with us today is Delegate Patrick Hope, Delegate Rip Sullivan, Tannia Talento, who is the chair of the Arlington School Board. My aide, Julia Chun, will be taking specific questions. And then we have Holly Coy, who is the Assistant Superintendent for Policy, Equity, and Communications with the Department of Education. So the focus of this Zoom meeting is to really talk about how the Arlington school system is going to move forward when we open in September. And we'll have some insights in terms of what the state is expecting. We'll have some comments from Tannia Talento in terms of what the process might look like and what the emphasis might be in Arlington. And the lawmakers, we're primarily going to comment and allow our education experts to have the benefit of whatever viewpoints we've been exposed to, talking to our constituents and sort of weeding our way through all the numerous policies that keep coming out every day. Before I start, I just want to say this is an obvious statement, but one statement that needs to be made. We've been watching some real transformational statements these last few days, these demonstrations over the death of George Floyd and past racial instances where Black men have died at the hands of police brutality. There seems to be a real moment where we're all coming together, and I think that is just incredible. And I just want to say that fortunately, our school system in Arlington has always made a commitment to ensuring that regardless of a child's race or regardless of a child's zip code, that child will receive a quality education and as much equity and opportunity as we can possibly provide. And I just want us to always embrace that goal and continue with that goal. And I believe my colleagues would endorse that statement pretty wholeheartedly. Okay, well, I guess we will turn the Zoom meeting. the presentation, our first presentation will be from Holly Coy, and then we'll take it from there. So Holly, go ahead.
Wonderful. Thank you, Senator Favola. It's a pleasure to be with all of you this evening. My name is Holly Coy, and I am the Assistant Superintendent for Policy, Equity, and Communications at the Virginia Department of Education. And this evening, I'm going to walk you through the state's latest guidance for school divisions around the Commonwealth on reopening. And Senator Favola, your timing is absolutely impeccable. The governor just announced this phase guidance earlier this afternoon. And so we'll be walking you through all of that and then happy to share links and resources for you as they're made available both today and tomorrow as the guidance comes out. So I want to start by saying that schools will be open for instruction next year, but instruction is going to look very different most likely. Virginia schools are required to deliver new instruction to each and every student in the 2020-2021 school year, but most likely some of that will happen in person and some of that will need to take place via remote learning. This return to school plan that the governor outlined today aligns school reopening phases with the Forward Virginia Blueprint and the phases for business reopening. So think of these as parallel. We're going to move now our schools through these phases along with our businesses and the rest of our communities. So the idea is that this plan scales up in-person instruction. That'll start immediately. But these phases really provide flexibility for our divisions. So I will outline what the options are, what's permissible through this plan. But then each local school division is going to take that guidance and apply it somewhat differently based on the needs of students, families, some of the logistical and practical realities of a division's buildings. I also just want to note as we dive in that at the heart of this plan is addressing the health, the well-being of students and staff, and addressing the social and emotional well-being of our students as well. We recognize when we bring students and staff back to buildings in the fall, it will have these closures and the past few months will have had very different impacts on them, and students and staff will be at different places, and we need to be cognizant of that before we jump into to algebra with them. The other part about this plan and the phases that I'll lay out to you is that it attempts to prioritize equity. And what I mean by that is that as we think about scaling up operations and scaling up in-person opportunities for our students, our goal was to provide those opportunities for the students who have been most impacted by the closures, while also recognizing that we need to safely resume in-person instruction for every student. So there are three kind of distinct phases for our schools, starting with phase 1. Now, as of Friday, all of Virginia can move into phase 2, but phase 1 still is an option should any locality decide to stay in phase 1, or should we need to go back to phase 1 if health conditions necessitate. So phase 1 permits special education programs and childcare that's already operational for working families in our school buildings. And that's pretty much it. Phase 2 builds on that. It adds in opportunities for preschool through 3rd graders, so our youngest learners, as well as English language learners, as well as summer day camps in our school buildings. And those are sometimes run by the school division itself, sometimes by an outside nonprofit or partner. So as we think about phase 2 and options available to our divisions, those are what will be immediately available to them. For phase 3, we open up in-person instruction to every student every day. However, in all of these phases, there are physical and social distancing measures that must be adhered to. And so while some schools may be able to accommodate every student in school every day, the practical realities of 6-foot social distancing of desks and workstations, of staggering students through communal spaces, may mean that that isn't quite the reality for every student. So the expectation, in order to cover all the content, is that divisions will think about hybrid plans. And so which students are in the building every day, how that learning is supplemented with virtual or remote options will be decisions that local divisions need to work through. Like I said, this provides the maximum flexibility in each phase. Divisions may be more limited based on the practical realities, like I said, or the local health conditions, which we recognize vary from locality to locality. Before entering any operations in phase 2 or phase 3, all schools, public and private, must submit to the Department of Education a health plan. And this health plan has to cover a number of components, but how they're following both the Virginia and the CDC guidance for cleaning and disinfection, social and physical distancing, what kinds of policies they have in place to protect staff and students who may have complicating health conditions, who may be safer at home, either working or learning there. And that is coming as under an order of the Public Health Commissioner. He issued that order today, requiring any public division or private school to submit that plan to the state before they open in either phase 2 or phase 3. So while some of these options are available immediately, divisions do have to demonstrate, private schools do have to demonstrate that they have a plan for maintaining the safety and well-being of their students and staff when they open school buildings up. Just a little bit about some of those social distancing measures that I mentioned. This includes things like the 6-foot separation between students and teachers, students and students, teachers and teachers at all times. Restricting the mixing of classes or groups of students. So keeping a 3rd grade class together, for example, and not having that group commingle with another 3rd grade class down the hall. Again, this is trying to mitigate the risk of spread of COVID-19. There are large gathering limits per the governor's executive order. So in phase 2, that's 50 persons, and that counts for graduations, assemblies, any type of large gathering that a division may have. The recommendation for phase 2 is that we close communal spaces, cafeterias, auditoriums. If that's not possible, the recommendation then is to stagger use of them and disinfect in between uses. Again, trying to prioritize the health of different groups of kids coming through those spaces. In phase 1, there are no athletics or extracurricular activities allowed. In phase 2, that starts to open up. There is some guidance around school athletics. In phase 2, that can happen, but there has to be social distancing of 10 feet. So you can imagine that perhaps a staggered cross-country race could take place, some practices could take place, but it can't be anything with contact. We do not yet have athletic guidance for phase 3. That is still in process with the Department of Health, continuing to monitor health conditions. So the guidance exists right now for phase 2 in a very limited way for athletics and extracurriculars to be undertaken. And then there are a couple of things that apply in all phases. So per CDC recommendations for schools, this includes daily health screenings of students and staff. This is not necessarily temperature checks, but looking at the health of children, at the health of staff, visitors as they come in and out of buildings. Providing those remote learning exceptions for students and teleworking exceptions for staff who may be at a higher risk of severe illness. The use of face coverings. So this is one inevitably there'll be a lot of questions about. What do we do with kids in school all day and face coverings? The recommendation is that face coverings are used by students and staff when social distancing cannot be maintained. But there are developmental appropriateness considerations that have to be made, as well as medical appropriate considerations that should be made there. So with that guidance, you can imagine that if students are sitting at their desks and they're able to spread out in their classroom and the teacher is standing at the front of the room, that they might not need to have their face coverings on during the day. But there may be parts of the day or parts of transitions when that social distance isn't able to be maintained and the face coverings may become more important. I would say this is a strong encouragement and recommendation. We recognize the challenges that this presents with particularly our younger learners in schools.
Yeah.
So there is an official guidance document that kind of outlines phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, what's permissible and what's not. And I'd be happy to send a link around to everyone. This really lines up with the guidance from the CDC that was issued last month. And then at the department, we've been working on a wide variety of resources informed by our local school division partners to help think through these decisions, to help equip parents navigate this. So I'll also be happy to send around a link with a lot of frequently asked questions, some good resources for divisions, parent guides, and be happy to share that with all of you. We are striving to be a sound partner with our local divisions as they navigate these really challenging conversations and decisions about what this looks like on the ground for their students along the way. So with that, I will stop, hand it back over to you, Senator, and be happy to take questions as you all like.
Okay, well, I think the links will be very important because we'll all post them on our Facebook pages and websites and our social media outlets. So that really would be important. I guess I would turn to Tannia, Talento. Welcome, Tannia. Thank you for chairing our school board.
Thank you.
And all your service. Nobody really knows, I can say this because I've come from local government, nobody knows how challenging being a school board member truly is. It is the toughest elected official position anywhere. So thank you. Anyways, how would you like to comment?
Well, I want to first thank you for that overview, Holly. Right before town hall, I was reviewing all of the governor's guidance that just came in today. And the guidance document is going to take some time. It's 136 pages. So I know that many school boards and superintendents will be reviewing that document together and trying to figure out what we can implement within the various parameters that we have. So unfortunately, I don't have an update based on the governor's guidance. But where we were going and what we were working on prior to the guidance release today is the 3 scenarios that we have shared with the public to open, which is starting all of our students distance learning, and then if we were able to open in any capacity, do a hybrid in-person and distance learning. And then of course, depending on what guidance we would receive, the full in-person learning. But with the governor's guidance today, it appears that we would have to move forward with the hybrid in-person and distance learning. And I want to share specifically for Arlington that even if we went into phase 3, I don't know if Arlington would be able to remove itself from any kind of hybrid situation, because most of our schools are at full capacity or near full capacity. So in order to maintain that social distancing that they're providing, the 6 feet in the classroom, we would have to do the hybrid models. The hybrid models that are being discussed, and we have not made any decisions, but the ones that are being discussed nationally and that locally people are looking at regionally are that I think they're calling the 410 model and then a 2-2 model. The 410 model would be having 2 groups of students. Group A would come 1 week for 4 days, Friday, Monday through Thursday, or it could be Tuesday through Friday. And so let's say Monday through Thursday, and that Friday would be for cleaning, disinfecting the buildings, and making sure that we're set for the next group to come in. And then the next week, Group B would come in and having class instruction. Simultaneously, we would have the other group doing distance learning, and it would be synchronous instruction. So we would have to work through those models. The other model is having maybe 2 days of Group A with 1 day in between, or another 2 days. There was early discussion about every other day, but the concern there is trying to make sure the cleaning in between student groups. Transportation is another piece that we have to consider. There's going to be social distance required on buses, so maybe having every other seat filled. How does that look like for us? So these are all the things that we have been working on, and our new superintendent, Dr. Duran, has started a task force. They're working through our advisory committees that we have in the school board to create a diverse and representative task force of the community with principals, teachers, students, parents, and that is being formed and I believe their first meeting is this week. And the superintendent will be providing a monitoring item at every one of our school board meetings from now through August. So at any point in time, our board meetings are recorded. If you want to hear what the reopening plan is and the update, please tune in to our board meetings. You can watch them. We've had 2 updates so far, a meeting on May 21st and one on June 4th. But please tune in on our June 25th, because we'll then have had some time to process the governor's guidance that was provided today. And I do want to share that there are work groups that are being established to lead planning in 4 areas, which are instruction, operations, activities, and communications. As you know, instruction is focused on instruction, delivery of instruction. And I had the opportunity to attend a strategy session with Secretary of Education, Mr. Atif Carney, yesterday with a group of school board members regionally. And, they shared that the focus really is going to be the social emotional learning. And I think Holly touched on that, because we really need to recognize that we have students coming back who may have missed instruction, who may be experiencing trauma from illness, and students are experiencing trauma from what's happening right now with our protests and unrest, and what's happening with our Black and African American community, and the staff as well. So we have to really be able to focus primarily on the social emotional learning of all of our students and staff as we bring them back into this new model of instruction, and then focus on giving them the instruction and aligning it with the expectations for what our families and parents are expecting their children to receive, and also trying to make up for the education that was lost this last quarter. So there's a lot of work that we have to do. I expect there are a lot of questions, but I do want to cover that our working group on the operations will focus on our facilities, our staff. We also have to prepare for students who are immunocompromised, or staff who are immunocompromised, or students or staff who are actually compromised with anxiety, right? So we don't talk about mental health enough, but anxiety is real. And there is real fear from many of our community members of stepping outside their doors right now in the pandemic. So trying to support all levels of why a student or a staff may not be able to return to in-person instruction and work. So really looking at what that would look like. Our technology, we're really working and focusing on getting all of our students technology in case we have to go back to phase 2 or phase 1 at any point in time, or full closure, so that we're not in the situation we were this spring where our pre-K through 2 students were getting paper packets. So we're hoping to focus our CARES Act funding, for which for Arlington is about $2 million, because it's based on your Title I population of students. So it's not a significant amount of money in our budget and for our cost, but that's what we're hoping to focus that on. And then the other piece is going to be activities, as was mentioned by Holly, the athletics, what clubs look like, what we can put in, what we can't. And then, of course, communications, and really making sure that we improve on our communications, strengthen our communications. It's so important that we keep families informed about what's happening, and then be able to engage our families and get feedback from them. Right now, there's a survey out for all of our families, students, and staff on distance learning that we're trying to get feedback on to understand how we can improve for the fall, where our what we need to focus on as we implement these plans. So there's much more that I could share, I'm sure, but I want to allow time for questions and for anyone else who may want to speak on that. But that's a high-level overview of how we're looking at reopening and working then with the governor's guidance on understanding. Oh, and then I will touch on one more piece on summer learning. We had planned to have 100% virtual summer learning. The governor's guidance in phase 1 allows for in-person instruction for our special education students. Right now, Arlington is in phase 1. The governor said that on Friday, as Ms. Coy mentioned, that all of Virginia could enter phase 2, but it will be up to Arlington County government to determine when we're ready to enter phase 2. So at phase 2, then we'll be focusing on English learners, special education, and pre-K through 3, because it's one of the challenges is providing distance learning to our smaller learners, to our younger learners. But we're going to have challenges with finding enough staff to teach our students, and what that social distancing will look like in summer school. And unfortunately, we have some budget constraints. So we're going to have to work through a lot of parameters. So I just ask that everyone be mindful of those challenges that we're going to have to overcome to make that happen in a very short amount of time. And we're going to start those discussions. They've probably already started this afternoon with our superintendent and his staff. But I just want to share with you, even though the guidance is saying in-person instruction, we're going to have to figure out how to make sure we can find enough staff who's willing to teach this summer in person, make sure that our buildings are ready to provide instruction, and figure out, depending on what our staff ratio is, how many students we can serve, who are most vulnerable, how, and that's always a challenge because every student counts and every student matters, and we have to get to every student, and now we have to limit who we can bring in through these phases. So it's going to be challenging times for us, difficult decisions, but please know that we're all doing everything we can to make sure that we're serving our students to the best of our ability, and recognizing that we are not meeting needs for everyone right now. So I'll turn it back over to you, Senator.
We definitely would encourage you to, and I know, and you said this, and I know you will do your best, but our special needs students really fall behind when they don't have the benefit of that in-person instruction. Yes. And English as second language learners, they fall behind, and it's just so critical to ensure that that those children really do receive some kind of in-person instruction this summer. So, and I don't know if we get the HEROES Act passed, which is the next version of a stimulus package, which the U.S. House of Representatives passed. It's now in the Senate. There would be additional money to state and local governments, and I expect there would be some dollars that could be made available, certainly for educational purposes in these very targeted areas. Yeah. Can't make any promises. The bill hasn't even been heard in the Senate yet. So I'll turn to my colleagues. Delegate Hope, you have children in the school system, in the Arlington school system.
Yeah.
Triplets.
No, I do. I'm just like all the other
girls.
Yeah, thank you. I'm just like all the other parents that are very anxious to find out what's going on. And thank you, Chairwoman Talento. Thank you, Holly, for your presentations today. I know the governor's guidance is just that, it's guidance, and it's going to really be up to localities operationalize how everything is going to go into place. So there's going to be a lot of work that needs to be done. I know I've heard questions from my constituents about PPE and testing and those kinds of things that go on, and making sure that some of our indigent populations or lower income populations have those necessary materials, so that when if for one, if they are going in person, that they have that PPE. But also, if it's going to be virtual, that they do have access to internet and the technology necessary to make sure that they can learn. And of course, Holly, you know that I'm very interested in the population of those kids that are have trouble reading, and making sure that we develop a tool that a screening tool that works and that actually catches these kids. Arlington County has done a terrific job in using a rapid automatized naming test that's been very effective, more effective than what we currently use. I hope that we can figure out a way to find a screener that works. The RAN does work, and we need to figure out a way to catch those kids, because we're missing so many. And I really feel like with the pandemic, this is going to create a wider batch of kids that we're going to miss. And it goes to your point, Senator Favola, about special ed kids, especially not getting the same level of education and them getting further and further behind. So I know there's a lot to work on. I'm going to be a spectator the rest of this evening, because I'm interested in finding out what the situation is for my 3 girls in public schools. So thank you both for your leadership, and thank you for setting up today's conversation.
Delegate Sullivan, you raised 4 children, and they went to the Fairfax public school system, but you certainly had your experiences with public schools. So
I did, but nothing that could possibly prepare me for something like this. Just like no parent in Arlington could possibly be prepared for this. Like Patrick, I'm going to be a spectator, but only for a couple more minutes. Let me explain to the folks. I explained to my colleagues. I had a pre-existing another Zoom call I've got to get on in just a couple of minutes.
These days, yeah.
In just a couple of minutes, but so let me just take my 30 seconds to sort of echo your comments, Barbara. I think being a school board member is the hardest job in politics without a pandemic. Throw a pandemic on top of it. And Tannia, what you're doing, and Holly down in Richmond overseeing this on a Commonwealth-wide basis is just a remarkably hard job. Parents are understandably anxious. And we're not getting, well, you're going to get, I'm sure, most of it right, but not all of it right at first. And we're all going to be learning as we go. I hope people will be patient as they can be when what we're talking about is people's children. That's why this is so important. The one thing I have heard over and over and over again from constituents, and I'm very glad to hear both Holly and Tannia address it, is concern about special ed kids. Because they just present such challenges in the world we're facing right now. So I applaud you for paying particular attention to that, and I know you'll continue to do so. So thank you all for being here. And again, with my apologies to the assembled, to the folks watching, I need to sign off, but something tells me I'll be hearing a lot more about these issues. Thanks, Holly. Thank you, Tannia. Barbara, thanks for putting this together.
You're welcome. Thanks for joining us. We have had another theme that keeps coming up in questions I've been getting. Parents who have young children, and if they have to return to the workplace, they're very anxious about the availability of maybe a full day kindergarten or some after school programs. Some parents will not be able to continue to do telework, and if your child is young, your child does need some supervision and hopefully some age-appropriate developmental learning opportunities. Have we thought about that? Is that going to be something the task force addresses? And I guess I don't mean to put you on the spot, Tanya, but we want to
That's
get that
okay.
into the mix if that is part of the framework right now.
No, of course, and I'm seeing a few of the questions, so I'll try to answer what I can in my responses. We have not, we are aware that this is a challenge and that it affects many of our working parents. You know, we have single parents, two homes of two working parents, and parents who are frontline workers or are working in jobs that you can't telework already. I don't have any answers for you, and I'm sorry for that.
No,
I
that's
wish I had answers, but I know that there has been suggestions from community members. Can we use community centers? We have extended day staff. They generally, work in the morning and the evenings. What would that look like? Could we, so the questions I have as a board member and things that we're hoping to discuss over the coming weeks is, can we employ our extended day staff, full time, like to work, what does that look like at 7 to 6 p.m., right? Because they were already supporting our working parents and now we're asking them to do coverage for Group B, for instance, for families who can't have someone at home. And then what does that look like? Is there an application for that? We wouldn't be able to accommodate everyone. We already have wait lists in some of our extended day requests. So these are things that we're going to have to work through and find ways, but we are aware of that challenge. I think there's hope that some employers will be able to accommodate it, or that the workforce, because this is going to be a challenge for schools across the nation, that the workforce will change this concept of 9 to 5, Monday through Friday, to shift work. And what does that look like to support parents? But that's a nationwide conversation, a shift in how we view our way of life. And for now, our focus is, what do we do in September and how do we support our families and kids? So I don't have a good answer on that, but I know that it's something that's being discussed, and I know and expect parents will bring it up. I know, and then I think a person is asking, did we survey teachers on who will return for in person, or parents? And that is what our survey is asking now. If you're a teacher, are you willing to return in September? If you're a parent, would you bring your child in? We're trying to get an understanding of that, but it's a long survey. So we're just working on trying to engage our parents and get as much information as we can to do our best job in implementing this fall.
It would certainly be helpful if we could provide more resources for the extended day options, because one opportunity would be to contract out to, private settings like the YMCA or some churches if they met certain criteria. But I expect this would be a fiscal impact on your budget as well.
Our extended day program has actually been a program that pays for itself. So with parents, and it's actually a policy piece, and something that maybe I'm not versed enough in it to understand fully where the General Assembly impact is. But as a school system, I believe we're not legally able to provide daycare, but we work in this extended day piece. It's complicated, and so I may need to be corrected, but with the extended day piece, it's somehow partnered with the county. And so
That's right.
It's complicated in that regard. So then trying to look at what a full day of that would look like and where it would be located and who we can employ. It's a lot of, on the extended day and the care piece, there's a lot of facets to that solution and the problem solving for addressing that. But at any point where the General Assembly, our delegates and senators could look at how to support school systems and supporting the community in some of those ways, I think would be very helpful for all of Virginia as we move forward, because we have heard that this new normal may be in place for 1 or 2 years. The idea of going back from phase 3 to phase 2, back to phase 1, having it closed and reopen. And I know that I think in the guidance today, there was mention of they're developing guidance on what happens if, when we open schools, there is an outbreak or there's a student who has the COVID. I don't think that's happened in Virginia prior to closure. So what does that look like? And so what does that mean? What if we have to close schools for 2 weeks? What if it's one school and not our other school? So there's just a lot of logistical pieces that need to be worked through. But the daycare piece is I'm hoping that we will be able to work with our county and get private care support. I'm hoping that families can work with home care providers, but we're going to have families who don't have those options or don't have the resources
Right.
to find those options. And that's really who we're going to try to focus on supporting.
Let me ask Holly, have we thought through some possible options for school systems in terms of the extended day programs? Because the family's work situation now will be very different than it's been in the past, and more families will probably need some type of extended day than the ones we've been serving previously.
Yeah. The childcare conundrum as we phase back into work and school is really challenging. Like the chairwoman, I don't have any perfect answers than to say this has been at the heart of a lot of our discussions. There has been some movement this past spring in streamlining the legal process for schools to get childcare up and running in an emergency fashion. So there are some new options there, and there was some federal CARES Act funding that came through on the social services side that supported both private childcare and some public childcare offered through schools. And so as we think about the fall and what the realities are for working families, trying to continue both with the kind of legal avenues for schools to be able to operate, expand, and innovate in how the child care before and after extended day gets wrapped around their staggered schedules, and then what resources are coming from the CARES Act that we can tag to serve those most vulnerable families and those working families that don't have other options. So absolutely at the heart of many of our discussions and concerns, and looking for additional opportunities to innovate and support our local divisions there.
So let us know, Tannia, what you think would be most helpful from the state, and working with the county, we will do everything we can to be a support.
I will follow up with our superintendent and staff, because I know just enough to get me in trouble about it.
Yeah.
So, but I'll make sure that they know that there's been discussion at the state level, and that we just to be able to share what is needed to try to address.
That would be helpful. Okay, so I'll turn to my aide, Julia. Do you want to go over some specific questions that have been asked? I can read some in the chat column, but I can't read all of them.
So, Senator, one of the things that there was a light touch on, but you got a lot of questions on beforehand, are about PE, chorus, and band. I guess these activities that are done in school where kids might be exposed to higher amounts of respiratory particles. So is there a plan to handle that?
I'd say from the state guidance perspective, there is on the athletics 10-foot social distancing that's recommended. And so as we think about kind of marching bands, that type of distancing might be appropriate there as well, though I don't think our guidance is specific to that. So while it permits extracurriculars starting in phase 2, some of those may require some additional measures like even greater social distance, physical distancing.
And there's a note in the document I just printed out that if the event or practice is going to take place inside, there's a limit on the number of participants, 50 students or 30% capacity, whatever is less. So there's specific requirements. I don't know if the schools are going to need, I think we're going to be using outdoor options quite a bit. That might be one of the answers, unless we move to phase 3 rather quickly, and then maybe there'll be different guidelines. I think I want to say to the viewers, these guidelines are evolving. We try to follow this. The state has articulated the CDC guidelines to the best of our understanding, and we are working with the school systems to implement them. But we are interested in hearing from school systems if they have another approach that would meet the same goal. So I think that's important to know. We're all attempting to provide the most holistic educational opportunity we can provide under the situation, under the circumstances. Other questions?
We have another question about balancing, any thoughts on balancing the technology use of kids who are basically on a screen all day and, you know, maybe suffering some migraines or other kinds of issues. But are there any plans to look at other models that maybe de-emphasizes the use of such technology?
I'll answer from the APS perspective. What I can do is take that feedback back to our superintendent and my colleagues on the board. We also encourage you to please share that kind of feedback on our engage email, engage@apsva.us, because that is the kind of feedback that we're collecting. I have not heard, we're doing virtual open office hours, and I haven't heard of this particular concern as of yet, but I know that we've always had constituents very concerned about our device. And prior to the pandemic, we were actually in discussions about, you know, what maybe removing devices in the elementary model. Now we find ourselves in a completely the other end of that spectrum and having to provide devices to our pre-K through 2. It's challenging. I don't know how we keep our children safe, providing them instruction without that access. But then again, distance learning for pre-K through 2 or 3 is very difficult. The attention span, the focus, the lack of social engagement. We're hoping, the hope is that the synchronous learning that we were not able to implement this spring, that will bring some type of camaraderie with our students, because they'll at least be able to see each other on the screen and know that they're on the screen at the same time that their peers are. But again, I have not heard of any discussions on that, and I will definitely share that feedback for us to be creative and thoughtful on how we can support non-screen use while providing distance learning.
Can I just add something? I passed a bill this year that would direct the Department of Education to put a work group together to develop guidance on screen use and what's appropriate for different age levels. And it would bring healthcare professionals to the table, academics to the table, to look and see what are best practices. And hopefully that is something that will continue, and we'll get some more information out in the fall.
I supported that bill.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's, you just have lots of challenges. It's very difficult when you're sort of forced into one educational mode. And we're trying to, again, we're trying to combine, once we move to phase 2, the, you know, in-person instruction with the online learning for some of the reasons that you just mentioned, Tannia. So there's some other questions here. Of course, there was one question about the school system partnering with certain commercial real estate properties regarding space. So that's something you can put into the mix. I know that there's always security issues when schools open facilities or use facilities. They want to make sure the children are safe. So, and then we have to have enough staff to go to the different facilities. So nothing is ever easy, but that is a suggestion that came up.
We have another question about pre-K to 2nd or 3rd grade group of students who don't meet the special ed threshold, but may have other types of special needs because they have ADD or ADHD. And so do you have any thoughts on what kind of distance learning might be suitable for them come fall?
Well, I'm going to ask Holly about that. The recommendations talk about having more space and smaller class sizes, but you go ahead.
Yeah, so one of, you know, apart from special needs that individual students might have, the developmental stages of those young learners and their need for social engagement, for tactile engagement, was one of amongst the reasons that they were included in an earlier phase. Because of that, we've heard discussion from some divisions about even when we're in phase 3, would those younger learners go every day and take up space in a middle school or high school, while high school students did more remote or virtual learning, given that they can be more independent and thrive in that environment a little more. So I would just caution that regardless of the phase, there are lots of options for those students, and hopefully the division is accounting for some of those special needs that wouldn't necessarily fall into special education programs, but they're thinking through the accommodations that might need to be made for particular types of learners along the way, whether that's age-based or some of the other needs that were noted, ADHD or other.
I can share that we have been focused on our special education population and trying to understand how to meet their IEP needs, waiting for governor's guidance, trying to determine what is going to be the best plan for them in the fall based on how reopening looks like. There has been very high level discussion and considerations about exactly what Holly said. What do we do with students that really can't be in front of a screen every day? And I think that, as APS has always done, is looking at, yes, we have special education students. What if your student doesn't fit in the cohort that is in the situation that is getting the exception? We've always had cases where, what is the situation? And we work with each individual student in that case. So I think we would probably implement something very similar to where I think one of our viewers was sharing that their child has migraines. That's a health issue. If they can't do online learning and we have the ability to have students in school, how do we accommodate that? But what does that look like? How do we keep the cohorts separate? So do we have a group of students that are coming in every, the whole time, and that's a separate cohort and that's a separate group? Those are the kinds of questions that we would have that I don't have answers to, and that will be developed processes and issues that will have to be considered as we look to implement the guidance. But what I really appreciate about the town hall is being able to capture these questions and share them with our superintendent, school board members, and staff, so they can, and hopefully, I expect the task force will be bringing this forward as well. I also noted there was a question about us working with local businesses. I don't know if the task force has looked at that, but I will definitely take that feedback back to our staff and superintendent.
We have a very active group of participants with lots of questions. Okay, I'm reading some that are on the panel side. Do they correspond to the numerous questions that came in before the Zoom meeting, Julia, or should we just?
They're a little bit different. We're getting a lot of questions right now about students who are being served on the Section 504 plan. And again, I think that's what you were trying to address before. Maybe specifically the pre-K to 3rd grade group, but definitely those who may be suffering from ADD, ADHD, anxiety, if they'll be able to be put into a different cohort if needed, or if they'll have any sort of options.
The state has provided options to the school systems to address those kids that may fall into those unique categories, within the framework that we have offered. I guess the challenge will be is how you categorize all the different students, or do you allow parents to self-select into different options, or do you offer options to everybody?
I'm not as well versed in our special education processes, but I know that we have support at all levels for 504s, IEP, students ADHD. If you have an IEP, it's because you've had an assessment done until you qualify for an IEP. But that's separate than a 504 plan, which also provides some accommodations. And you can have ADHD and not necessarily have an IEP, but have a 504 plan, vice versa. There's lots of layers to that. I will share that one thing I would ask while I have you, Delegate Hope and Senator Favola on the phone, is that you please, please, please lobby for full IDEA funding. It is so hard on our schools to not get full funding. They've promised us, I want to say, they're supposed to pay for about 40%, if I'm not mistaken, the last time I looked over that bill, and schools currently get about 14% of funding per student. And so we're doing everything we can to support our students and systems, but we really need more funding to really meet the full needs of our students with disabilities. And so, by
Well,
getting that full funding,
that's a federal funding stream for the IDEA, is it not?
yes,
And
and
we
I
have,
know
so we
that
have
they
to
do
go to
work
our
on-
congressional delegation, but we do meet with them, periodically, well, actually pretty regularly, and we need to bring that up. And maybe, Patrick, we can wrap this around the COVID-19 crisis and it's the more significant impact on some of these.
Well, I think it's more imperative now than ever because we have to support and serve our students with disabilities.
Yeah, no,
And
I totally agree.
by law, our English learners and students with disabilities, not only is it the moral thing to do, but it's the legal requirement. But we also have to serve our economically disadvantaged students and our gap group students. And so every single dollar that we have to invest, into a student, if we run out, I'm terrible with idioms, but you're splitting hairs, what is it? You're robbing Peter to pay Paul. I mean, it's horrible to be in this situation now where we have so many students in need, and those needs are going to grow. The number of students that may not have fallen under economically disadvantaged situation may now be in that due to the recession that we're entering and the job loss. Right. And it's imperative that schools be able to support them and provide that instruction. So, we're going to continue to work and do everything that we can to meet the needs of our students, but any help that we can get from that perspective. And Arlington is a very wealthy county. And so
right.
I'm grateful for what we have, because I know that many other counties in Virginia are in much more dire needs. But if we're in this situation, what is that saying for our state and the children all over our state? So
no, and there's so many ways that we need to look at our federal programs to leverage some dollars for you. I know Abby Raphael raised to me the fact that the state needed to submit a waiver to ensure that the families that were never on free or reduced lunch, but now are eligible for free and reduced lunch because of layoffs and unemployment, that those families be able to get food for their families and for their children through the summer. And fortunately, the state did submit a waiver and it was granted by the federal government. But had I not had that information on the local level, it would have been more of a challenge to make the case. So we will certainly go back on and see if we can talk about funding, and maybe we'll find different ways to talk about it. Even if we can't get it specifically under an IDEA, perhaps we could get it under a broader rubric for you.
Thank you.
I think there's also, speaking of federal funding, there's also a question about CARES Act funding. And I'm wondering if anyone could elaborate a little bit more on how that gets allocated. If APS can earmark any of the $2 million from the CARES Act funding?
I think the CARES Act funding has to be used. There's different levels of CARES Act funding. So depending on how the future acts come in, will earmark the funding differently. But this first funding has to be used to address instructional issues with that are a consequence of the pandemic and the emergency closures. That's my understanding.
Right.
And Holly, please correct me if I get some of this information, because I am a school board member that has to learn all this stuff in my position. But
all right, we're all in this together.
Right. For APS, where we are today, and I say where we are today because things have been changing daily, we are only getting $2 million of CARES Act funding because it's based on your Title I student cohort. That money is being recommended at this time to be used to provide devices for pre-K through 3, so that we are prepared to provide instruction regardless of how the phases move forward or move backward starting September.
I think there will be additional dollars for technology.
So, well, right. So there are supposed to be other dollars coming in that can be used for technology, but we're also trying to provide internet access to all of our families. So right now we have to thank our county. They have really supported us in our internet piece. I think they gave us a $500,000 grant. We're going to be working with Comcast, and this is in the works now to provide internet access for a year for families in need. And so I don't know, we haven't gotten the full cost at the school board, but for some of these things, but we're trying to also get keyboards for our middle school students who have iPads. So the $2 million isn't covering all of that. We could take some from that. And I think we're also looking at what our summer school needs are going to be. We still have a little bit of money in reserves. We were anticipating the difficult budget year next year. So once the school board gets an understanding of what the cost is to meet the summer school instruction in person, understanding what it's going to cost to provide devices from pre-K to second for September, understanding the needs of our internet access. Another thing that I would love our delegate and senator to consider is making internet a public utility, right? And so
we are definitely trying to do that. In fact, in the whole broadband section of the budget was one of the few parts of the budget where we didn't unallot dollars, which was a statement about how important the governor and the General Assembly believe this universal access to broadband is. And we can definitely, by your point is, if you don't make it a public utility, make it a mandate that when the SCC provides permits, if you will, that there is an acknowledgement every underserved area needs to be covered in those permissions.
right. I mean, it's very multifaceted. Arlington is a place where we could provide, where I believe, if I'm not mistaken, we have the ability to provide internet access to almost the whole county, but the challenge is the legal barriers.
There are some legal barriers.
Right. And
Right.
so doing something like what you're saying, Senator Favola, or making it a public utility removes those barriers. And so then it's easier to support our families. But
would you also talk to local governments? We've had mixed. Maybe Patrick has heard other things, but I've gotten mixed feedback from localities in terms of whether they want barriers removed or they don't want barriers removed.
Right.
And I, like you, believe it should be a public utility, but I don't know.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think there's an outright prohibition, and we would have to undo that. And I have talked to the chair of our communications technology committee, Cliff Hayes, and he's very interested in taking this legislation up. And I'm hopeful that it could be part of a package when we convene for a special session, because I think it's that urgent for schools to use this virtual learning and create that access for kids that are low income.
And we definitely can move that along. And I'm not even sure we would need as aggressive legislation as we might think if the governor could put this under his emergency action. I don't know. We'll ask.
There's
Holly,
also,
just before, Holly, do you have a comment on that?
No, I don't know if that would fall under his emergency action or not. I'll just supplement the CARES Act funding piece with just a small note that the funding stream that the chairwoman talked about, the $2 million for Arlington, is part of a formula-based stream. There are others. There's a governor's discretionary fund, and then there's a state set aside. So it's not enough money to go around. The needs are immense, but there are some other state dollars that hopefully we'll have more information on in the next week or so to share. But like I said, the needs are immense, and so we recognize that while there may be some additional dollars, there's still not enough to go around.
And if Congress would pass this HEROES Act, then the states would, have an additional allocation, which would be very generous, and we could, in fact, then use it for some really pressing school needs. Julia?
I think there
We probably have
are
time
a lot
for
of
the last question.
So there are a lot of parents who are talking about, you know, secondary schools and high schools, especially when there are a lot of students taking very challenging AP classes and having to compete with students across the country, and students that need differentiated instruction, meaning, you know, they're at different math levels, taking different foreign languages. Are there any plans to specifically look at how to address middle and high school students?
Had the opportunity. I don't know. The answer is that I don't know of any plans yet. But again, for those who are new to Arlington, we transitioned our superintendent. Our new superintendent started June 1st. So we were in addition to the pandemic, we were in transition and we had to find a superintendent. We're very excited about Dr. Francisco Duran, who is the new superintendent. You know, I think that, and on his first day, he was already working on getting the task force together, learning about our community. He had 2 town halls today. So I just say that when I say I don't have an answer, please know that we're working on these things. And what I have been able to share so far as feedback from the community is I had an opportunity to meet with PTA presidents, and some of the things that they were sharing is, you know, making sure that we're aligning our schedules, right? So that students aren't having to pick to 2 classes. And people don't think about that if you have an elementary school kid, but if you have a middle school or high school student in your home and your teachers aren't sticking to the schedule that you had at hand, and mind you, our middle school students have to be at school at 7:50 a.m. Right? So we're not asking middle school students who are at home to get up at 8 a.m. to attend a class. At least that's what we would be looking at the fall. Is that realistic? Maybe starting those times later if it's online learning, but if we have a hybrid model, how does that synchronize with the in-person? So there's just so many difficult questions, and I just fear that we're not going to have great answers, and it's going to take a lot of compromise and work both with our community and our schools to meet the needs to the best of our abilities for our students in these very unprecedented and challenging times. But I know we have to end Senator Favola.
Reach out to the broader community. I think you will get a lot of support. There'll be a lot of private partners who will want to help. Certainly the state and we'll have to talk to our congressional delegation, but the investment in our children is so important, and we just can't have them fall behind or be left behind. So we will help in any way we can, but you're right, the challenges are immense, and I don't know if you'll be able to address every single one, but
we're going to try. We are going to
try, and we'll provide community resources. There are questions we did not get to, but we will ensure that Holly Coy and Tannia get every question.
Excellent. I was just going to ask for that. Thank you.
Patrick and I they're coming through on our emails as well, so we will be working them as well. And we, again, want to be a resource. So I'm going to conclude. Patrick, do you have anything you want to add? Or
No, I just want to thank Holly, the Chairwoman Talento. You guys are terrific leaders, and we're with you. We really appreciate you being here tonight. I think it makes me feel much more confident going into the school year. But we look forward to working through all these really tough issues. And thank you so much for your leadership, for the both of you. Thank you.
Thank you. And can I just take an opportunity to thank Holly, and please thank our governor. I know that they're really looking at different funding to support schools. Even in one thing we didn't talk about was PPE, and the recognition that all schools are going to have to make sure they can provide the PPE to their students and staff, and so for students who may not have that. So I know the governor and their staff are looking at the set-asides, as you said, and as a funding that's not enough, but I just really want to say thank you. Thank you for prioritizing education for Virginia. We're really grateful for that. Knowing that it's not enough, we're still grateful for anything that comes our way. So thank you for all that you all are doing.
We're going to do better. We're going to do better. So thank you. Okay. Well, for those of you who are listening, we are also going to, I have pulled together a Zoom meeting on this Friday at 5 o'clock, and it will be with the Fairfax folks. And Holly, you'll be joining us again, and there'll be the Fairfax school board member and the delegate from the western part of my district, Delegate Murphy, as well as Dr. White, who was on a citizen task force that Fairfax pulled together to look at the transition to opening schools in September. And then the following week, we'll be talking to the Loudoun people. So stay tuned. I just like a lot of Zoom meetings. Thank you. I want you all to stay safe, and we'll support each other. Good night.